Can you hear now? Yes? Well, I don't hear an echo. That's good. So, welcome to Harbor Branch. I am Jim Sullivan, the Executive Director of Harbor Branch. So happy to see this kind of turnout. This is amazing. You all know why we're here, to celebrate the life of Dennis Hanisak. I will have a few comments, but I'm going to turn it over to Kim, one of Dennis's daughters.
Hopefully I'm not going to lose it and cry. We'll see. Good afternoon, everyone. As Jim said, my name is Kim Unger. I am Dennis's oldest daughter. And on behalf of the entire Hanisak, Unger, and Marone families, I want to thank you all. Oh, it came on. There's the echo. I wanted to thank all of you today for coming to honor such an amazing man, my dad. So my dad joined Harbor Branch in 1977, and I was born in 1976. So I basically grew up here at Harbor Branch. I have vivid memories of coming to Harbor Branch with my dad on the weekends, out on the slabs in the back, and I would run around while he was playing around with his plants, as he would call them. But he would always take the breaks, at lunchtime, and we would go search for the big gators or look for the manatees in the canals or the big fish. And I spent a lot of time here. I would spend time in his office listening to his eclectic choice of music. It's where I got to like the Beatles and Led Zeppelin so much, interestingly enough. But on his wall, back in the early days, and some of you, the very few that I actually recognize, because I'm Kim, that's Stephanie, who most of you know, because I was long gone by then. But anyway, back in the old days, he used to have this poster on his wall. And so some of you older people who are here might remember this poster, but it was a poster of a guy and a little girl on the beach. And I always thought it was a dad and a daughter. And the poster said, "I'd rather stand beside you than lead the way." And he kept that poster for a lot of years as he moved through all the different buildings. He lost it at some point in time, and I actually tried to find it on the internet a few years back. You'd think you could find it. It didn't exist. Not that one. There were other versions, like with cats and crazy things, but there was never that exact poster that I tried forever and ever to replicate and give to him. So I think it's only fitting that I kind of mention it now today, because I think that poster kind of sums up everything about my dad. He wanted to teach people, and he ultimately, that's what the crux of his career was, but he wanted to share it with you. He didn't want to be that leader that you just learned from afar. He wanted to share those experiences with you in every way possible, whether it was at home or with his coworkers or with his many students, who I can only assume is this side because you all are the younger group. I don't really know. Because again, I was long gone by then. But it was really important for him for you to experience what he was trying to teach you. My dad was a really big sports fan. For those of you who may know, he loved the Dolphins. He liked the Yankees. I know. He was a big supporter of the Georgia Bulldogs. Go Dogs. And he loved Duke basketball. There we go, right there. There's my two really big dookies right there. And we would always in our house quote Mike Krzyzewski, the great Coach K. Now, this wasn't actually his saying. He borrowed it from Ralph Waldo Emerson. But he would always say that it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And I feel like that's really what my dad embraced as well, right? He wanted you to experience everything. Didn't matter what the end result was. It didn't matter where we are here now at the end, right? It only mattered of all the experiences and everything you picked up along the way. So the little things, the little parts of his journey led us all to be here today. And so I'm really, really appreciative of each and every one of you being here today to share your stories, to hear your stories, to talk out there about your stories, about your journey with him and how he kind of shaped all of us in different certain ways. And we all have these different stories. And while I am surprised I did not lose it and bawl and cry, I know I will while listening to the rest of these. So thank you all on behalf again of the whole family for coming, and I really, really do appreciate it. And I really hope some of these speeches are funny so that I can make it through the rest of this day. But thank you all.
So any of you who knew Dennis as a scientist know that he had an incredible career, over 45 years. And I just want to highlight, I feel I have to highlight some of what he did. And there's no way I can do all of it, or we'd be here till 6 or 7 o'clock tonight. He did get his bachelor's at Rutgers in 1971. So I know there are some fellow alums here. And he got his master's and PhD from URI, my alma mater. And we occasionally reminisced about that. We were almost there at the same time. He, as soon as he got his PhD, came down here in 1977, as Kim said, and became a postdoc at Harbor Branch in the seaweed aquaculture group. I was not here back then, but there was a seaweed group back then. He left for a few years, apparently, I didn't know this, to go to SUNY up in New York, took a leave of absence from Harbor Branch for a couple years in the early 80 to 82, but then came back to Harbor Branch, and he was here ever since. Over his career, I looked on Google Scholar, he had over 100 science publications, many of them on the Indian River Lagoon, one of his passion projects, really. And he literally wrote the book on seaweed in the lagoon. And I believe you can actually get some of these books. They are here. If someone really wants copies of them, the family is donating them to people here, so you can get one. He established the Indian River Lagoon Observatory Network, which lets us look at real-time water quality in the lagoon, used by scientists, fishermen, used by the general public to understand what's going on in the lagoon. A huge effort. He helped initiate and manage the Indian River Lagoon Symposium. I think there are 13 plus years that's been going on. A great service to the community, get all the scientists together that work on the lagoon and share their science, and he promoted it again as a community leader. He helped establish and manage the Ocean Science Lecture Series, which many of you have probably been to and sat in this very auditorium. I see Dennis's seat is actually unoccupied. Last row, last seat. And we're sorely going to miss him next year when we have to do it, and he is not here to introduce all the speakers. That was one of his pride and joys. He loved arranging, getting the speakers here, and just being the host of it. He was named our Director of Education in 2007, which was not an accident because he started Semester by the Sea here, which is an undergrad one immersion program where these kids come mostly from FAU, but not always, sometimes outside, and get immersed in marine science and oceanography. And he started that, and that's gone for over 20 years. And hopefully, as part of his legacy, we'll keep it going. It's critically important. I know some of our people that are here now went through Semester by the Sea and ended up getting their graduate degrees and staying at Harbor Branch. I think Gabby is one of those. Is she in it? Yes. He established the Junior Scientist Program with the Indian River Land Trust as well, another great outreach program to expose kids to science. He helped establish the Marine and Oceanographic Academy, which you see across the street. It's a charter school of St. Lucie County. Again, a high school that exposes kids to marine science and oceanography. So he had this passion for education, and I think Kim kind of gave that impression to you too. He was the president of the International Phycology Society. He was also the president of the Phycological Society of America. For those of you who aren't scientists, phycology is seaweed, weed, plants, whatever. And in 2018, he actually won the Audubon Environmental Educator Award. So he was like a hero of the lagoon. And this is only a very, very small part of what Dennis did, but just an amazing, amazing career. So I will try to keep this really short. I told all the speakers we're going to stay on time, but I want to give my own personal recollections of Dennis. When I first came to Harbor Branch, I had to interview and try to get a job here. He was my host, so he picked me up at the hotel, drove me to Harbor Branch, ferried me to different professors to talk to them. And at the end of the day, so these are, if you do a day-long interview giving a seminar and talking to people, at the end of the day, Dennis looked at me and he's like, "Do you want to get a beer?" I'm like, "You read my mind." Guess where he brought me? Huh? No, not Pineapple Joe's. Think Vero Beach. Kilted Mermaid. So we, left here. We went to the Kilted Mermaid, and I believe it was a Wednesday night. It was open mic night. I know all this now because I go there a lot. But we basically stayed and shut the place down. And I left that night when I go back to the hotel, and I'm like, yeah, I could work here. This is good. And we bonded over our love of IPAs. Dennis loved IPAs. We meet at the Kilted Mermaid many times in the future, and he'd always be like, oh, there's a great double IPA on draft. And with that in mind, here's a hazy IPA. This is for Dennis. I know he would appreciate this. And I'll close with a couple of stories. He always gave me encouragement. This is one thing I really loved about Dennis. When I became director, occasionally you have to make decisions that don't go over well, or they might be a little controversial, whatever. And he would always, without fail, send me an email afterwards just saying, good job. I really think, you did this. Always was encouraging, always. And he, like I said, without fail, he would always get back to me and try to say, yep, I agree with what you did. It was tough, but that was the right decision. We also, another great support thing he did, I play music, so I played at the Kilted Mermaid in various places around here. And Dennis, we'd play open mic, Dennis would be there. He'd ask, hey, you playing? I want to come. And he always supported what we were doing in music. And the last time I saw Dennis, we were actually playing music at the Walking Tree Brewery for a fundraiser for Harbor Branch. And he came up afterwards. We had played the George Harrison song, Isn't It a Pity? And I remember this now distinctly. He came up and he's like, that was great. I really, because he liked the Beatles, obviously. We've heard that. And he's like, that is just a fantastic song. I love the way you did it. And, Dennis was the heart and soul of this place. And it's kind of ironic that it is a pity. It's a pity what happened. We'll go on. But I'll never forget him. And with that, I will bring up Kristen Davis.
Hi, everyone. Oh. Thank you, Tracy, for that. So if you've been to the Ocean Science Lecture Series, I'm sure you're all familiar with Dennis's, the notes that he would do on his clipboard. So I knew that that's what I would probably need to do for today. I first came to Harbor Branch 22 years ago as a visiting student through Hood College. Our group spent the spring semester visiting different marine institutions along the East Coast, and we were lucky enough to stop at Harbor Branch for a couple weeks. We stayed on campus in the busman dorms that were there at the time, and were invited to attend the Ocean Science Lecture Series. The lecture that day was Seagrass in the Indian River Lagoon, Kermit's Lament. It's Not Easy Being Green, by Dr. M. Dennis Hanisak. I thought, wow, seagrasses seem pretty cool. They're not stingrays, which is what I wanted to study, but I want to learn more about them. After the lecture, I walked up to Dennis in the gallery and said, I want to talk to you about being an intern. So he immediately put on his admin hat, as he said, and started telling me about the program and the application deadline and so on. And I said, no, I want to be your intern. And he seemed to be surprised by that. But long story short, I was Dennis's intern that summer and discovered a newfound passion for seagrass. I returned to school, and shortly after graduating, came across a job opening with another lab here at Harbor Branch. And yeah. I can't explain that, John. Oh, that was great. Yeah. Oh boy, that's hard to follow. I reached out to Dennis to get his thoughts on this position, and he said he could tell me about it, but he actually had a brand new job for a project doing something really cool in the lagoon, and if I was interested, to let him know. So I jumped at the opportunity and was lucky enough to work with him for the next 19 years, or rounding up, as he often did, to 20 years. Dennis was an incredible friend and mentor to me. He was supportive, encouraging. Sorry. Anyway, we'll get to the next part. That's funny. So I discovered a love of macroalgae by going to the dark side, as he said, because I don't know why he said it, but I loved it. Through his passion for it, and was even lucky enough to go on a JSL dive with him. That dive held a special symmetry for us. It was my first dive, his last, and we were at Pooley Ridge, which is, if you know Stephanie Farrington, her favorite spot because it has tons and tons of macroalgae. The cool thing about that, though, is the location was the site of his first dive that he did with Steve Blair and Don Liberatore, who are both here today, which is pretty cool. And it was pretty amazing because, like I said, it was just fields and fields of algae. But thinking back to the moment that led me to Dennis and to Harbor Branch and helped shape my life, it all started with Kermit the Frog. Dennis began that fateful 2002 ocean science lecture with, "It's not easy being green." But another quote from Kermit feels perfect for today. There's one other thing that I think every person or frog needs to be creative: friends. For me, the best part of creativity is collaborating with friends and colleagues. Mine happen to be bears, pigs, rats, and penguins, but you go with what works for you. Much like Kermit, Dennis surrounded himself with a diverse and remarkable circle of family, friends, and colleagues. He let his creativity flourish, enriching the lives of everyone in this room, those watching on the live stream, and many more. You'll be hearing from just a few of those family members, friends, and colleagues today. And for all of those speakers yet to come, just remember, I know where Dennis kept the net. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Kristen. I would like to call to the stage current HBOI professor, Dr. Jordan Beckler.
Thank you, Jim. Let's find these notes. Quite nervous. Never have I ever done anything like this before. So, and I forgot my glasses, so. So it's pretty wild to be on this side of the podium, right? This was obviously Dennis's spot under so many scenarios, right? Interns, ocean science lecture series, and everything else everybody's already talked about so far. And most importantly, a lot of these really focused on students and mentoring the next generation. And this is something that, he was so strong and so committed to this. And that's really what I want to talk about today, is the impact that this has had on me and even how I see this on other young scientists. So both academically and personally, Dennis and I had a close relationship. We both worked on water quality monitoring. We both cared deeply about the Indian River Lagoon. I cared about the mud. He cared about the water. But in that environment, the two are sort of married. We collaborated on a few projects from when I arrived here in 2018, and despite being the busiest guy at Harbor Branch, I didn't really realize it then, but now it's become quite obvious. He really insisted on dropping everything to come out to the field with my group and some of his staff. Every month we would go out all day long for seagrass monitoring. And, he loved being out in the field, but it was also just a time where he would check in on me, right? So he would be keeping up with me. And that was, I look back on that, and that was just really, really thoughtful of him. When I first came here for my interview, I remember talking with him for almost 2 hours in the afternoon. My feet were hurting. I was ready to go, right? But he was just keep talking, and, it was such a phenomenal conversation. He must have been about 67 years old then, but he had the sharpness and wit about him that I I thought he was probably about 10 years younger. When I saw in his obituary, he was 73. I actually had no idea. I thought he was, like at least 5 or 10 years younger. Beyond his warmness, I was amazed at how he had not just built but maintained such a massive water quality monitoring program. As somebody who does a lot of this type of work, I describe the Erlon as quite literally the most comprehensive water quality monitoring program in the world that I know of. So, that is like scientifically something that's really, really, something we can be proud of. And then to maintain it, to find the funding to maintain it for that long, it's extremely difficult. Perhaps the most important thing he did for me and countless others was inspire confidence. I always felt comfortable in a room full of scientists I didn't know if he was there, because I felt like I was with the big guy. I could still imagine his voice saying, "You did good," right? So you spoke of that earlier. This extended for when we all had to sat through my Bowie rendition at the Kilted Open Mic. He was listening front and center, IPA in hand, and he lied to my face. It was not good. After I gave my ocean science lecture series, we chatted a bit with my parents. They actually came. And he told them afterwards that I was a rising star at Harbor Branch. Again, this little white lie was finally the nail in the coffin regarding the myth that PhDs are not real doctors. So last time I saw him was at the Walking Tree Brewery event about a year before he died. I realized this morning that was the first time he met my daughter Willa, who was 5 months old at the time. I'm so glad he got to meet her. Raising daughters was a consistent theme of our discussion over the last year or so. He encouraged me so much in my role and gave me the confidence that I could juggle work and fatherhood. I know I can speak for thousands of young scientists when I say how fortunate I consider myself to have known Dennis and to have been a part of his legacy. I received quite a few calls, emails, and even seen social media posts from scientists and faculty members around the state who have expressed how positively he impacted their careers. So to all the young students and scientists here, you should know that if he were here today, he would let you know that you'll do good. And that's all I got to say. So, thank you.
Our next speaker is another Harbor Branch faculty member, Dr. Matt Ajamian.
You know me. Thanks, everybody. Some of this is going to be a little bit of a rehash because there's a lot of common themes, I think, for those of us who got exposed to such an amazing man like Dennis. Just like Dennis was there for my faculty interview 10 years ago. He's probably the best person to sell the place because he loved it. And he shared a lot of his optimism for it with a lot of us and really helped me conceptualize the possibilities here. Of course, in the Indian River Lagoon, which is in our backyard, and I'm a fish guy, and there hadn't been a fish guy here for a while, and he was adamant about getting somebody back, and he really opened up my eyes to what was possible. And shortly after arriving here, you could really tell how interwoven Dennis was in this place, and a lot of the other faculty would tell me, he's in the walls, type of thing. And I didn't really understand what that meant, but I think I do now just because we see his presence everywhere. And, he really helped fortify this place and make it strong and resilient. And, he was a great collaborator, too. I mean, he worked with everyone. I don't think you'll find a single person here who hasn't had some sort of professional interaction with him. And like Jordan said, he was really inviting and instilled that confidence in you. And that's important because young faculty like Jordan and myself, although I guess I'm considered mid-career now, he used to always call me the new fish guy, and then he stopped calling me that. That's when I knew. But, starting a position like that, it's a tremendous responsibility and extremely overwhelming and exciting at the same time. And, we don't really, at least at the time, we didn't really have a really set guidance or mentorship program for that. But Dennis was there, just like he was for Jordan, just somebody who was, great to bounce ideas off of, and who would check in with you, even though he didn't have to do that. It was not part of his job. He just did it because it was right. And, at faculty meetings, you get a bunch of scientists in the room. There's a whole bunch of different opinions, as you can probably guess. There's peaks and valleys and attitudes and emotions, and he was always that stabilizing force and voice, and we called him the voice of reason, And, that was really an absolute joy to experience. And he was, in a sense, like having a hybrid colleague and parent, for his younger faculty. Ironically, he and my dad, we figured this out. They actually graduated the same year at Rutgers, as it were. Either way, I think and hope that us here, the rest of us at Harbor Branch, can continue to propagate his warmth, his passion. His contributions, as Jim laid out, are really countless. And a lot of them are unquantifiable. And that's why it's a nice opportunity to talk in this type of venue and share some of these things with you. And while the place will never be the same without him, his legacy will live on through all of us, and particularly the students who he really cared about. He saw that in the future of those scientists. The best thing he ever did was really just show up and listen. And I think that's something we all just will continue to do if we're going to be great. So thank you very much.
Now we're going to have Hannah and Laura. They're going to give a little bit of insight into the student perspective on Dennis. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name's Hannah, and I'm a student here. And I first met Dennis at the garage that he used to get into Lab 2, and we really hit it off. He was definitely a pillar in the building and in the community among the students. I don't think I ever missed him at a spring social or a fall social or a Pints with Professors. And he was always so excited to meet us and learn what we were working on and to get to know us as people. And I think about how many students he had over the years, like in his classes, and how many committees he served on. And it was like 500-something people in Semester by the Sea alone. I had the privilege of hearing a lot of these student stories over the past couple of weeks, and a couple really stuck out to me, particularly the ones from Semester by the Sea. The first one was from his TA, who was doing fieldwork with him with the class over the summer, and Dennis kept giving him a hard time, like, hurry up, go faster, don't you know what we're doing? And he was teasing, and it was all in good fun, but he genuinely really did want us to do better and to be better and to be the best people, scientists, and students that we could be. And the next story that really stuck out to me was from the end-of-year pizza party from Semester by the Sea, where he told all the students to please reach out if they needed letters of recommendation or anything else for their careers or just in general. And he told them that he has students reach out to him from 5, 10, 15 years ago to tell him just what an impact he made on their lives and their careers and their science. And he told all these students to please reach out to me because I'm not going anywhere. And Dennis's legacy never will, through all of his students and all of the stories they share. And we have one more story to share from Laura. Do you want to go?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura. For most of my time here, Dennis knew me as a teacher assistant for Semester by the Sea. I only got to know Dennis more after the IRL symposium. This happened because the live stream for my research talk got corrupted and the recording couldn't be recovered. But actually, in a way, I'm grateful that this happened because it caused Dennis and I to talk more. And he learned about my love for the Beatles from my choice of apparel. This is the shirt that started it. He, Dr. Tim Moore, and I were able to go toe-to-toe on the band's trivia. We even got into an argument on who was the best Beatle. He pivoted from George to John from the times I talked with him, and to my great failure, I could not convince him that Paul was the best. Even from our brief interactions, it was obvious that Dennis was stubborn, but, but he had a strong compass of integrity. One time, Tim and I corrected him on a piece of Beatles trivia, and it wasn't a big deal, so, I forgot about it shortly afterward, but later, after the weekend passed, Dennis emailed me and Tim about how he had fact-checked his false assertion. Oh, and yes, He included citations. A true researcher indeed. And admitted in overly excessive detail how he was wrong. I don't know if you ever knew this, but I was actually quite touched, especially considering how unnecessary it was. But it showed the kind of man Dennis was, how much he respected the accuracy of his words, and how he had the integrity to prioritize the truth, even for silly arguments. That's what I'll remember him the most for. So, Dennis, as John Lennon said, shine on, like the moon and the stars and the sun.
I'd like to bring up Dr. Rachel Bruton. She just got her PhD within the last 4 or 5 months. Dennis served on her committee.
Thank you. It's really hard to scratch the surface of Dennis's impact on students. I think that we've got that from what we've heard so far, because it was so large. Over his career, he impacted so many students and helped them find their way, and it sounds like he also helped faculty find their way. He liked to make predictions about what would happen next for students. For some reason, he was always telling me that I was going to go on and do something with choral. I don't know why, but I'll take it. Not a problem for me. So I actually knew about Dennis before I knew Harbor Branch even existed, because in my undergraduate marine botany class, we used that book that is being passed around here, The Submerged Plants of the Indian River Lagoon Field Guide. And I found that book so compelling and that class so interesting that I thought about studying marine botany for my master's work. But I was pretty sure at the time that my future was solely devoted to fish. However, which a lot of you may not know, I now study marine plants primarily. So it just goes to show you that you can't escape your destiny and you can't escape macroalgae. So Dennis affected the careers and the dreams of many students that he never even met all over the world through his work. So later, when I came to Harbor Branch and I got to know Dennis as a mentor and a colleague, and I started doing my PhD part-time, he was so supportive of me and my work, and he encouraged me to keep going, but not to work too much, which is pretty ironic given the source. But Dennis was really the embodiment of the idea that if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. And he truly loved Harbor Branch and marine botany. So it's noteworthy that as one of my PhD committee members, Dennis returned to me a hard copy of my dissertation. Nobody else printed it out and read it. It was covered in what I think were coffee stains, scribbles. Some of the notes were legible. Some of them I had to go ask Dennis what they said. He knew what some of them meant. Others, he was like, it probably wasn't important. But it's truly amazing that given how busy he was and how much he had to do, that he took the time to actually read through every word of that and put some thought into it. Another thing he was really passionate about was field work. So anytime that I returned from the field, Dennis would call out to me from his office and he'd say, hey, did you find any weed today? Or he would say, hey, did you find any grass out there? And of course, for all of you who are worried, he meant seaweed or seagrass. But this joke never quit being funny, especially for Dennis, because he would just laugh and laugh. And really, those post-field work check-ins, even though they were silly, they meant so much because they were very uplifting when you were tired, and he really provided inspiration to keep working through it. So one of the last times I saw Dennis was in a student's proposal defense. And in the defense, he listened intently, and he offered some well-thought-out questions at the end for the student that really made them think, and some advice about how to improve the project. And that was just a little snippet of how Dennis acted and interacted with students all the time, supporting and helping them try to be their best. So the impact that Dennis had on me and other students is really immeasurable, and I'd just like to offer up my thanks to him. for giving so much of himself to education and mentorship. So thank you.
So as you can imagine, Dennis had a lot of long-term colleagues. So we're going to move into part of a program where these are people that knew Dennis for many, many, many years. And the first is Dr. Chuck Jacoby.
Thank you, Jim. This is the part of the program where Jim is the most nervous because of the time limits. So I'm hoping I'm going to set a good example. So since I returned from down under, I shared and enjoyed many experiences with Dennis. A lot of them dealt with work. He made a massive contribution to this Indian River Lagoons algal blooms investigation that I was leading for the district, St. John's District. Not only with his science, but with all the multiple meetings we held to talk about the science and try to communicate it to the public. He made meetings fun by drawing me into what we called the best lurker competition, where the goal was to be in a meeting and not say anything for as long as you possibly could, no matter how ridiculous the rhetoric got. He led a comprehensive and extremely valuable review of the monitoring in the Indian River Lagoon that's going to pay dividends way into the future. And of course, we heard a little bit about one of his babies, the Indian River Lagoon Symposium, which has played a pivotal role in motivating scientists and the public to care about the lagoon. But the memory I want to leave you with is one that comes from about 40 years ago. So when I told my wife I was going to go back to those days, she said, "Oh, those days." She says, "Those were the days when you took off your shirt, you had a chance of turning heads instead of a guarantee of turning stomachs." And I said, "Yeah, those days." So this is about Dennis being a stalwart on the sand volleyball court. There was a sand volleyball court just down the road here. It was across from where Ed Lincoln had his house at that point in time. And Dennis would come over from the aquaculture group in the heat and the sun of the midday, and we'd play volleyball. He'd help pick sand spurs off the unfortunate individuals who landed too near the edge of the court where, we didn't clear all the sand spurs. And then before returning to work, he'd join us for a cooling splash with the turtles and the odd baby alligator in Ed Link's pond. So as in volleyball, as in life, he was an enthusiastic and respectful team player, always gracious, win or lose. And so as they say in Oz, Vail, Dennis Hanisak.
I'd like to call up Emeritus HBOI, his first Emeritus Professor, John Reed.
Wow, Dennis, what can I say? I've known Dennis for over 45 years. I started here a year before Dennis. I considered Dennis a best friend, a confidant. Those early years, 35 years, when we were a private institution, we had 3 ships, 3 submersibles, Johnson Sea Link subs. And Dennis and I spent probably over a year at sea overall, going to sea on our ships and subs. An incredible time. We traveled all over the Bahamas, the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, the Galapagos Islands. And I think Dennis would agree that our favorite dive sites were in the Bahamas, and especially San Salvador Island. I remember scuba diving with Dennis off of French Bay at San Salvador, and we're standing on top of the wall, 25 feet deep, with scuba gear. We look over the wall, down this abyss, where these giant valleys were cut into the wall and covered with huge plate corals, 8 and 10 foot diameter, plate corals, Agaricea, Montastria. And as we stood there, we just dove off and would do slow somersaults over the wall, down to 130 feet, 150 feet, 180 feet. It's okay, I was the dive officer. So So what was incredible was Dennis was so agile and comfortable in the water. He was like a sea lion. He just was fluid, just floated through the water. And if anybody had told us then that in 30 years, all of those corals and reefs were going to die, we wouldn't have believed it. That's not possible. How could that be? But it is, and it was. And Dennis and I were fortunate that we got to see those reefs at the height of their pinnacle of the Holocene. And I feel sad and sorry for the new students that will never see the reefs the way they were. When we were back in town, back at Harbor Branch, we had incredible camaraderie. As Chuck said, we'd play volleyball. Lunchtime, we'd go play basketball out on the court up there in the front parking lot. Dennis was great on the basketball court. We'd party out at the beach at the Pines in North Beach. And Steve Blair, Dennis, and I played this crazy game, underwater hockey, where you could hold your breath and push a hockey puck along the bottom of a pool from one end to the other. I'll tell you, if Dennis had that puck and was moving it, you were not stopping him. He was a force to be reckoned with. He was something else. One last memory. In 2010, we had this great oil spill, the Deep Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Deepwater was pumping out millions of gallons of oil. And Harbor Branch sent its ship, the Seward Johnson and the Johnson Sealing submersible, to study the spill. So Harbor Branch scientists, NOAA scientists, were collecting samples for a month. And at the end of that cruise, Dennis and I got off the ship at St. Pete, and I remember standing on the dock with him. And all of a sudden, the immensity of it hit us. Not the immensity of the oil spill, but the immensity that was going to be the last cruise that we would have with the Seward Johnson. That would be the last dive we would have with the Johnson Sealing submersible. Dennis and I hugged. Dennis broke down and cried. I've never seen the big guy cry before. Everybody in this room knows how much Dennis was dedicated to Harbor Branch. He probably did more for Harbor Branch than anybody I know. First one in the office every day, last car to leave at night, here virtually every weekend. But as dedicated as he was to Harbor Branch, his greatest love was his wife Linda, his Steffi, his Kimmy, and now his grandchildren. I love you, Dennis. I miss you.
I'd like to welcome up Harbor Branch Professor Dr. Shirley Pomponi.
Dennis would get a big kick knowing that we're all gathered here today. Some of us haven't seen each other in like 20 years or more, and I think he'd get a big kick knowing that he's the reason that we've all gotten together. Dennis was a colleague. He was my friend. I still find it hard to believe that I won't hear Dennis say, "It's Shirley," when I pass his office. Sometimes I would disappear for long periods of time, so he always seemed like he was happy to see me, and he never, ever said, "I'm too busy to talk right now," although I know he was always too busy to talk, but he always gave me time. Over the 39 years I've known Dennis, my two favorite times were when we went out to sea on the biomedical and Marbot cruises, and when I'd swing by his office to ask his advice about some issue. I think for many of us, Dennis was a confidant, gave us a lot of good advice. We went on a lot of cruises together. Those of you who have gone to sea know how hard we work. We're working from the time we hit the deck in the morning till we go to bed, and nobody worked harder than Dennis. But we also played hard. Even Dennis played hard. He also ran interference for us with the ship's captain. So when we stayed out late, he would help us to make sure we could go out again. I'm sure that those of you who are on the Canary Islands cruise, and you know who you are, remember the night we all got in trouble with the captain for staying out, way past curfew. We're talking way past curfew. It was somebody's 21st birthday, and we celebrated, and we blew curfew big time. We all got in trouble the next day. We all got called into the principal's office. And we thought, this is it. We are never going to get to go ashore again on this cruise, all these beautiful places in the Canary Islands. But Dennis smoothed it over, so somehow we got to go out again. My last chat with Dennis was on April 29th, and just like every other chat, after addressing the problems that we got together to discuss, we digressed. In fact, that was one of my favorite Dennis expressions, but I digress. Anyway, it's just what John said. We always finished every chat talking about our children and our grandchildren with pride and with love. And I couldn't help but notice in some of those pictures, I think it was on Kim on Dennis's shoulders or with him, and Bob Ballard was in the picture, and how many years later was it that you ended up going on the Jason cruise, so getting involved, so kind of like a foreshadowing of that. Dennis was part of the fabric of Harbor Branch. You've heard a lot of us talk about his contributions. He was the person behind every Harbor Branch signature program, and in particular, our formal and informal education programs, Ocean Science Lecture Series, Semester by the Sea, the Summer Intern Program, National Ocean Science Bowl, MOA, the Graduate Student Program. We're all really sad. We're going to miss Dennis. But his presence and his legacy and our memories of Dennis as our colleague and our friend will always be with us.
I'd like to welcome up longtime Harbor Branch collaborator and affiliate faculty member, Dr. Clay Cook.
Thanks, Jim. Shirley has talked about the Ocean Science Lecture Series, MOA, Semester by the Sea. I want to say a few words about Dennis's role in the National Ocean Science Bowl. For those of you who don't know it, it was a national competition for high school students involving 26 locations in the U.S. The winners got their way paid to the finals, which were held in places like Asilomar, just south of the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Seward, Alaska, it snowed. In fact, not only did it snow, there was an avalanche that blocked a student train for several hours. And in Washington, D.C., it was held the year that the Sant Marine Hall was opened at the Smithsonian. Anyway, Dennis was the local coordinator for the Manatee Bowl, which actually alternated years between Erasmus, Miami, and Harbor Branch. Dennis's role as coordinator was pretty special, working with the local teachers, convincing this 50 or 60 of us volunteers to help him out, and using his wonderful logistical skills. I have to thank Kirsten and Jill, who really helped out on that. All sorts of snafus might happen. The last competition was in 2021, when because of COVID, it was all done virtually, and somehow they pulled that off, which is quite remarkable. Anyway, one quick story. Part of the Ocean Science Bowl competition was the grading of what are called team challenge questions. Now, what you have are 12 different spots on this campus where students had to write written answers to questions, which would be rushed down to Ocean Central, where Dennis's grading team, Tammy Frank and Ned Smith, would frantically grade and get them back back to where they came from enough to get the competition going again. Dennis always made sure that his evaluation team was well provisioned. Lots of donuts. Thank you, Tammy and Ned, for your help on that. What was typical of Dennis is how he got all that done, particularly in the midst of everything else he was doing. I never figured it out. As Shirley just said, Dennis was here. This was like his second home, maybe his first home. And he never sought credit for that. A few personal comments, if I may. First, Dennis and I are both New Jersey kids. We both went to Rutgers. I was about 5 years ahead of him. And Dennis always accused me of being a closet phycologist. Well, after all these years, Dennis, I came out of the closet. Thank you. We're both rabid Duke University fans. Now, Dennis did not actually attend Duke, but Kim got her master's from the Duke Environmental School. And we would always end our emails to other with a big Go Duke sign. Dennis, teaching was something I respect very much, and I just can't thank Dennis enough for everything he's done for the educational programs here at Harbor Branch. Thank you.
Now I'd like to welcome to the stage Gwen Brzegi. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Oh, there you go.
Surprise.
Yeah, that's a surprise.
The most common pronunciation of my last name is Burr. How do you pronounce that? I worked for Dennis from summer of '84 to summer of '89, so I was in the cohort that was fairly early in his career. It was my first job straight out of graduate school, and Dennis was a very important mentor for me. He had a high standard of ethics, he was honest, he had a strong work ethic, but he also knew how to play, and he had a really good sense of humor, which bordered on the teasing. And I'm because of time. I mean, back in those days, I could tell stories. People that worked there back then, we could tell story after story after story after story after story after story, and they gave me a time limit, so I'm going to tell one. Somewhere in there, Dennis latched onto the word lollygag. Cute word, very nice. It's really fun. He used to use it to tease us. He'd be coming through the lab, and people weren't obviously doing anything. They were between something, or we'd be on a research cruise, and in that we've been working for 16 hours kind of blah phase, and he would accuse us of lollygagging. Well, once or twice is cute. 10 is, whatever. 100 is, oh, please. And so Mary Samuel and I had a very, very labor-intensive data processing piece of work. It involved staying in a dark room for hours on end, projecting slides of coral reef quadrats, and then using random dots to score what's under that dot. And then that would be assembled for the data analysis. So we spent a lot of time together, and in between slides, of course you're talking. And one day Mary said, we got to do something about that lollygag. It's really beginning to annoy me. And those of you who knew Mary knew that she didn't get annoyed easily. We got to do something. It's giving me a bad attitude. That's not okay. How can we make this fun? And so we started tossing around ideas, and what we came up with was, gee, do you realize that the Fraternal Order of Lollygaggers spells fool as an acronym? We made the t-shirt. Everybody on the team got one, but Dennis, as the chief, got the Master Fool t-shirt.
I'd like to welcome Bob Bernstein. You ready? You look like you're up. And I should say Dr. Bob.
This is an honor, a bit terrifying. So for you, Dennis, in the back seat there, I've known Dennis since 1977. Yes, 47 years, the majority of both our lives. He and I were both postdocs in the very early days of that program at Harbor Branch. Dennis is working on aquaculture, growing algae for biomass. I was benthic ecologist. My shirt's covered with images of mollusks. But somehow our careers drifted that we both ended up working on seagrass, often together. And I'm going to say that Dennis was a giant. And yes, he was a physically big man, but a huge impact, as you've heard today and seen throughout this occasion. And Dennis was highly involved in research and education. I saw the research side primarily of Dennis. So he and I co-authored some research publications, both peer-reviewed and reports. But I wondered how many people he actually did collaborate with. I think this room full is an example of only about 200 people. But I don't know how many more. And although Dennis created entire programs and basically ran the Indian River Lagoon Symposium, he did have an eye for details. For example, the latest symposium, 2024, with 118 presentations, he managed to catch a typo in both my abstract and my PowerPoint, and corrected it twice. And I wondered, did the man ever sleep? I don't know how he did it all. But what did Dennis mean to me personally? A couple things. He was a colleague. He was my main go-to guy for bouncing and discussing offbeat ideas. Like, do plants really have strategies? And why the hell are these plants behaving this way? Dennis was the only guy I could do things like that with. Or was there more drift algae in the lagoon in the 1980s than there is today? Finally, two attributes. One, Dennis was a friend to discuss all kinds of issues, not just science. And finally, and it's perhaps his most endearing quality, Dennis was always fun. Somehow his enthusiasm made everything enjoyable. At the Indian River Lagoon Symposium, when I arrived, I was often greeted, "Bob Bernstein, how the hell are you?" And he was that way to very many people. And on a project planting Halophila johnsonii in Sebastian Inlet, Dennis insisted on pounding the rebar to anchor some things that we were putting out. And he somehow made an art form of that. No one else could do that. And for these and many other reasons, I can unabashedly say, I love the big guy. Thank you.
I'd like to invite up Dr. Grant Gilmore.
I started at Harbor Branch before there was a marine laboratory here about 54 years ago. I met Dennis when he came here in 1977 with John Ryder to work in algae. And of course, I didn't work with him then. I was in the Marine Science Division, but he came over to the Marine Science Division in the 1980s. And we worked together on a number of projects, one the famous Fort Pierce Inlet project in 1990, And then he went with me on an expedition to Central America, where he collected a new species of blenny for me in algae, which that was a very productive expedition. But Dennis really revealed his great interest in education and young scholars when he chaired the Harbor Branch site for the Woods Hole Jason project when it aired its third program in the Galapagos Islands. This auditorium was central stage with students remotely manipulating the Jason ROV from here while I was exploring the sea around the Galapagos. Dennis's daughter, I assume it's Kim, was actually in the Galapagos during that program. And I might add that this building had just been built, and Dennis was the first to bring education in on a broad basis from this location. So it goes back to the late 1980s. And it was when all of us on campus saw Dennis's talent in stimulating young people for education. She did very well in that program, and that was broadcast globally. Not long after that, Harbor Branch started its own education program, which took place in this building, sponsored by the Florida Institute of Technology. Dennis and I both taught in that program through the 1990s, as many graduate students passed through this campus. I will miss Dennis as a colleague and a major source of energy, outreach, and productivity emanating from this location. Thank you.
For some closing comments, I'd like to invite up Brian Hanisak.
Thank you. Thank you for all the wonderful things that have been said and written about my brother Dennis. It has been extremely comfortable for myself, my family. He has accomplished a lot in his lifetime, but I feel there is more he would have wanted to accomplish, whether it was at work, family, or in life in general. This is nothing I think any of us was prepared for. This is something I didn't think I would be doing for many years to come. Always thinking there is more time for everything in life, whatever brings your way. Please keep what Dennis has accomplished alive and going forward. Thank you for all coming out today and celebrating his life. Thank you.
That was only a very small part of what Dennis really did and what he meant to all of us. It's just amazing. And it does not end. You're all invited to go out into the gallery and outside on the patio. We have some refreshments, and we can talk more about Dennis. So please help yourself and hang out for a little while. Thanks for coming.